I heard it before I saw it, an ear-splitting roar that turned my blood to ice, sending horrible chills spasming around my body despite the warmth of the steaming thermal vents that surrounded the wreckage I was exploring. Then a white and red tail darted across my vision, and a single word blared bright red within my mind's eye: run. The next thing I knew, I was desperately flailing in the opposite direction, propelling myself as fast as I could toward my Seamoth, the Sea Glide clutched tight in my hands. And then I was behind the wheel, slamming down the accelerator, not caring or even paying attention to what direction I was heading in, as long as it was away from the Reaper. I knew I should have listened to my PDA's warning, because no amount of loot could ever be worth risking the only life I had in waters within which multiple Leviathan-class lifeforms had been detected. A second roar, just as loud, told me the Reaper was still right behind me. I could outrun it. I'd done it before. The Seamoth was faster, so as long as I just drove in a straight line, I would eventually pull away. Yet, no matter how far I seemed to travel, the Leviathan always sounded right behind me, its echoing roar piercing the otherwise silent waters. At some point, I thought I began to see a translucent, worm-like shape flicker across my windshield with a hammerhead shark-like head that held mesmerizing yellow eyes, and then a new chorus of roars replaced the old. Promptly, there was another heading straight toward me, and instinctively I veered left, praying I hadn't just given whatever was behind me the perfect opportunity to catch up. Yet nothing touched my vehicle and I continued my blind sprint. A third appeared and I veered again, miraculously still remaining untouched as roars continued to populate the ocean. And in the cacophony, perhaps I even heard the PDA mention adding new information to the databank, something about a dead zone, but right then I had more pressing matters to worry about. All I could do was dart around straight through the inky blackness and hope my Seamoth could outrun whatever monstrosity was still chasing me. And then the noises stopped. The world went silent, except for the soft hum of my Seamoth. Tentatively, I spun the submarine in a slow 360, yet not a single movement or glow caught my eye. So, with my heart racing, I reduced my speed until eventually even its hum ceased to caress my ears. Still tense, with adrenaline flooding through my veins, I took a moment to breathe and calm down and check one more time that I was definitely still alone. Now confident that whatever was chasing me had given up, I exited the Seamoth to check for any exterior damages, but all there was were a couple of minor scratches and dents, nothing a quick use of the repair tool couldn't fix. By all counts, I was extremely lucky. Well, there was also my amazing piloting skills, but I couldn't deny that luck was involved. I did notice, however, that a large chunk of my battery had been drained from my Seamoth, and considering I'd only planned for this to be a quick exploration mission, I was pretty sure I hadn't packed any extra power cells. With that in mind, I figured my next plan of action would be to head back to the nearest moon pool and get a recharge before determining anything else. Assertively, I raised my PDA and flicked over to beacons. That's when I immediately noticed something was wrong. All the numbers for the distances were distorted, rapidly rising and falling, sometimes completely disappearing. Then, all at once, the screen glitched and 2 red words appeared under every beacon. No signal. What? I tapped the screen, waving it around the cockpit, hoping the signals would come back online. Yet the bright red words continued to plague my screen. I scanned the ocean. I had no idea where I was. How was I supposed to find my way back? Turning the engine of my Seamoth back on, I again spun the submarine in a full circle, praying those 2 terrifying words were just a glitch, that maybe I could still see the dull blue glow of a beacon. Yet still, nothing. No, this couldn't be happening. My breathing began to develop a harsh quality, and I felt my heart begin to thunder in my chest. My vision began to blur and fade, and suddenly I saw what seemed to be long blue tendrils reaching out toward me. Tiny bubbles seemed to grow in size and stare directly at me. Then I shook my head. The world returns to its endless soft blue. Whatever I'd seen, if I'd really seen anything at all, was gone now. Stop and breathe, get a hold of yourself, Riley, I chastised myself. I wasn't out of options and I still had battery left in my Seamoth. I had enough to worry about without the need for crazy hallucinations or panic attacks. I tried my best to relax my body and slow my breathing. Alright, first things first, return to the surface. If I could spot the aurora, I could find my way back home. But as my Seamoth burst through the water tension to rest at sea level, all that greeted me was a soft light blue of a limitless sky. Barring my Seamoth, not a single formation broke the water to extend above the infinite blanket that covered the world. Again, I felt my breath grow desperate and the world once more threatened to disappear. Slithering currents seemed to caress the edges of what little I could see. Desperate, I slapped my face to force the world to return to my vision. I had not survived 3 months on this cursed water world just to die, lost in a crazed state of hallucination. In a burst of yearning hope, I pulled out my PDA again to see if the signal had returned. Nevertheless, those 2 red words continued to stare back. Not knowing what else to do, I decided to check out the new information that had been added to my databank during the relentless pursuit. I was out of ideas and I had nothing to lose. The ecological dead zone. At least I knew where I was now, beyond the end of a volcanic crater, the floor expanding sleepily downward into a never-ending abyss where the only lifeforms were microorganisms and Leviathan-class creatures. Wait, a downward slope? If I could find the sea floor, I could follow the incline upward back into the crater. Immediately, I pointed the seamoth downward and nosedived into the cloudy depths. The depth gauge plummeted as light began to fade, replaced with a claustrophobic darkness that coated me like a heavy winter coat in the middle of a burning summer, causing my skin to prickle and sweat to break out across my entire body. In some strange instant of insanity, a thought occurred to me that now would have been a great time to be wearing a stillsuit. And the whole time, I expected at any moment a colossal leviathan to burst out in front of me and swallow me in my seamoth hole. Yet the waters remained calm and eerily empty. Suddenly, a loud crack followed by a long groan like the sound of twisting metal tore me from my thought and back into the darkness of reality. My eyes quickly brushed the world around me before landing on a depth gorge, 815 meters. Unknowingly, I had passed the seamoth's crush depth. I couldn't descend any further, and all that was below me was just a continuous black void. I quickly propelled the seamoth back upwards until the creaking ceased and the submarine stopped its anguished whines. Then, spinning around in what felt like my 500th 360 in 5 minutes, I made sure I was still utterly alone before exiting my seamoth to repair the crushed damage. Yet as the last of the cracks began to disappear, I thought I felt something brush my leg. I immediately tore it away, darting around my seamoth to try to put it between me and whatever it was I had felt. But as I stared into the void upon which I thought I felt the touch, more inky blackness just returned my gaze. Nevertheless, taking no chances, I wrenched myself back into my seamoth and pushed the accelerator as far down as it would go in a senseless plight to escape the millions of seemingly imaginary creatures my mind showed were chasing after me. Sunlight began to nuzzle the world as I climbed upwards and out of the inky depth. Checking again that nothing real was actually after me though, I slowed my seamoth and killed the lights. The world went quiet. I glanced at the power, 15% remained, and I was still no closer to returning home. That's when, for the second time today, I heard it. A soft roar echoing off in the distance to my left. Underwater, carried by ocean currents, it was impossible to gauge the distance. Instinctively, I turned to dash in the opposite direction before clarity struck my mind. The only life I'd ever seen on this planet resided around the crater's edge. I revolved around toward roughly where I'd just heard the sound and pushed forward. If I was right, there was a possibility that today didn't have to be my last. But if I was wrong, I glanced down at the seamoth's power supply continuing to fall dangerously low. Well, I didn't want to think about that. For what felt like hours but was probably mere minutes, I cruised silently through the empty waters, willing for just one of those worm-like hammerhead creatures to appear on the horizon. There was another roar, this time louder. A deadly ray of hope dangled ahead. The roars continued, growing more frequent, as if their caster were just meters away. And then, all of a sudden, mid-roar, the oceans fell quiet once again. And then I saw it. A single translucent body floated ahead. Its body lay limp, its tail drifting listlessly underneath. Despite my better judgment, I pulled my seamoth closer, and then I saw the reason for the lack of movement. The other side of its face was completely missing, with what looked like a yellow eyeball trailing behind by a hanging tendril. A yellow cloud began to pool around its head. What could have done that? Again, I searched the waters, but there was no other life. And then I remembered what I had to be doing. I checked my battery again. 5%. If the creature was here, I was on the right track, but with the amount of juice left, I had no choice but to be going the right way. There was only one option. Again, I pointed my seamoth downward and dove. I had to find the bottom. I had to go deeper. Seconds passed, and soon I was barely millimeters from surpassing the crush depths. But still, only inky blackness remained below. I still had to go deeper. I checked my oxygen tank. 225 seconds. I prayed it would be enough. Exiting the safety of my seamoth, I activated my sea glide and continued to descend into the void, the pathetic light from the sea glide barely piercing the darkness ahead. Yet, as seconds passed, I began to lose hope. The floor was too deep down. I would never return home. But then something solid loomed into view. From this distance away, though, I couldn't quite tell the shape of the slope, and so I drew closer. The beautiful soft yellow of sand rose up to greet me, and my breath caught in my chest. I could see the slope. I didn't have to die out here. And then the sand opened. The dull yellow burst into a blur of bright white light, and I had to cover my eyes to shield it from the intense glow. But as my eyes adjusted and returned to the sand, reality dawned on me. There was no sand. A giant eye stared back at me, a pool of white surrounding a circle of infinite blackness in the middle. It suddenly fell downward and a second eye appeared, and then in its glow, a mouth impossibly wide, full of teeth, leering upwards into a terrifying grin. In a blind panic, I flailed my arms, trying to swim upwards, but then something grabbed my leg and I felt myself shoot downward. And the last thing I saw, before the world fell eternally dark, was a face not unlike my own, and it began to laugh. It looked strangely wistful, I thought. And then it looked like nothing at all. And there you have it, the story of Beyond the Abyss. Definitely let me know what you thought about this creepypasta, what you liked, what you didn't, and what I can improve on. And if you have any ideas for stories you'd like to see, let me know too. I'm also trying to reach 10,000 subscribers, so if you could subscribe, it would help out a ton. But yeah, bye.